On June 4, 1959, Thurgood Marshall walked into the FBI's New York field office and asked the federal government to investigate one of his own. The man he wanted investigated wasn't a criminal. He wasn't a spy. He was Robert F. Williams, the president of the Monroe, North Carolina chapter of the NAACP, the same organization Marshall served as chief counsel. That meeting never made headlines. It didn't appear in Marshall's biography. It stayed buried in 1,300 pages of FBI files that wouldn't surface until 3 years after Marshall died. But what happened in that office put a target on the back of a Marine Corps veteran, a community organizer, and a duly elected NAACP leader. Within 2 years, J. Edgar Hoover would personally sign the warrant to hunt him down through COINTELPRO, the FBI's counterintelligence program designed to neutralize Black leadership. Most people who know anything about the civil rights movement have never heard of Robert F. Williams. That silence was deliberate. His story was buried on purpose, and the people who buried it weren't wearing white hoods. Williams came home to Monroe in 1955 after serving in the Marines. The Supreme Court had ruled segregation unconstitutional in Brown v. Board of Education the year before, and Williams believed something was finally changing. Then Emmett Till was lynched in Mississippi that August, and the men who killed him walked free. Whatever the court said on paper, the South had not changed at all. Monroe certainly had not. The town had 12,000 residents. The press estimated 7,500 of them belonged to the Ku Klux Klan. The local NAACP chapter had 6 members. 6. In a town where the Klan outnumbered the entire Black population, 6 people had the nerve to keep a civil rights office open. Williams walked in and decided that was not enough. Within 2 years, he had grown that chapter from 6 members to more than 200. He did not recruit the usual NAACP membership, the doctors and lawyers and business owners who showed up to meetings in pressed suits. Williams went to the barbershops and the pool halls. He recruited veterans, working men, people who understood that in a town where 7,500 Klansmen could ride through your neighborhood at night, polite letters to Washington were not going to save your family. He applied for a charter from the National Rifle Association and formed what he called the Black Armed Guard, 50 to 60 men, most of them veterans of World War II and the Korean War. They trained, they drilled, they kept weapons clean and ready, and in the summer of 1957, they got their chance to prove the concept worked. The Klan announced it was coming for Dr. Albert E. Perry, a physician and vice president of the Monroe NAACP. Williams and his men fortified Perry's house with sandbags and waited. A Klan motorcade rolled through Newtown, the Black section of Monroe, and opened fire from their cars. Williams and the Black Armed Guard fired back. The Klan scattered. They did not come back. The next morning, Monroe city officials called an emergency session and passed an ordinance banning the Klan from operating in the city without a special permit from the police chief. One night of armed self-defense accomplished what years of legal filings had not. The same city government that told Black residents the Klan had a constitutional right to organize suddenly found the authority to shut them down. All it took was return fire. Williams understood exactly why. He wrote that racists consider themselves superior beings and are not willing to exchange their superior lives for inferior ones. They are most vicious and violent when they can practice violence with impunity. Take away the impunity, and the violence stops. Monroe proved it. That should have been a national story. An NAACP chapter had defeated the Klan through disciplined armed defense, forced a city government to act, and done it without a single casualty on either side. Williams later wrote that no one wanted Black people to get the impression that this was an accepted way to deal with the Klan. So, the white press maintained a complete blackout about the Monroe fight. The black press wasn't much better. What Monroe proved scared people who weren't wearing hoods. Armed defense worked, and that was the problem. In 1958, Williams took on the kissing case. Two black boys, ages 7 and 9, were arrested and jailed after a white girl kissed one of them on the cheek. Monroe authorities charged the children, beat them, and sentenced them to reform school. The National NAACP office didn't want to touch it. Too controversial, they said, so Williams went around them. Working with civil rights attorney Conrad Lynn, he contacted European journalists. Protests broke out in Paris, Rome, and Vienna. The international embarrassment forced North Carolina's governor to pardon the boys. Williams had just proven that a local chapter president without a law degree could embarrass an entire state government in 4 months. The national legal team wouldn't even pick up the phone. Then came the courthouse steps. In May of 1959, a Monroe jury acquitted a white man charged with the attempted rape of a black woman. Williams stood outside and said what no NAACP official had ever said publicly. Black people could not rely on the law, he told reporters. The courts were lynching people legally. If it was necessary to stop lynching with lynching, then black people must be willing to resort to that method, meeting violence with violence. The reaction was immediate, and it did not come from the Klan. Roy Wilkins, the NAACP executive secretary in New York, removed Williams from his chapter presidency by phone call. Within days, the NAACP Committee on Branches issued a formal 6-month suspension. Before the national convention that summer, Wilkins circulated a private pamphlet to delegates that conflated Williams's call for self-defense with lynch law. The pamphlet was stamped not for publication. He did not want the public to see how aggressively the national office was working to silence its own chapter president. At the convention that July, 40 speakers rose to denounce Williams from the floor. Martin Luther King Jr. delivered the keynote that evening and used it to condemn Williams directly, warning delegates that retaliatory violence would be the gravest tragedy that could befall the movement. Williams stood up and answered all 40 of them. He told the convention he had called for self-defense, not acts of war. We as men should stand up as men and protect our women and children, he said. I am a man, and I will walk upright as a man should. I will not crawl. The delegates voted to uphold his suspension, but the rank-and-file membership across the South was listening to Williams, not King. Wilkins put it in writing himself. In a private letter dated May 28, 1959, he admitted that the thought of violence had been much in the minds of black people across the country. He acknowledged that by early May, the NAACP found it harder and harder to keep feelings from boiling over. The membership agreed with Williams. Wilkins knew it, and he suppressed Williams anyway. But the suspension was not enough, not for the people who saw Williams as a genuine threat, and not for Thurgood Marshall. The day after the Committee on Branches formalized Williams's suspension on June 4, 1959, Thurgood Marshall visited the FBI office in New York. A memo from that visit, buried in the 1,300 pages of Marshall's FBI file, shows that Marshall passed along information about a dissident NAACP leader in North Carolina and about other civil rights leaders who were advocating violence in the state. The dissident leader was Robert F. Williams. Marshall did not just report on Williams. He urged the Bureau to investigate. He framed Williams as a potential communist infiltrator, the one accusation guaranteed to get J. Edgar Hoover's full attention during the Cold War. Marshall later said in an interview that Hoover was convinced he was responsible for routing the communists out of the NAACP. And I did, Marshall said. The timeline tells the story. On June 3rd, the NAACP suspended Williams through internal channels. On June 4th, the NAACP chief counsel walked into the FBI and gave the federal government a reason to treat Williams as a national security threat. The internal discipline and the federal targeting were not separate actions. They were two parts of the same mechanism. Marshall's visit gave Hoover something he could not manufacture on his own: a black civil rights leader vouching for the investigation. When the FBI opened a file on a black activist, the standard defense was that Hoover was a racist pursuing a vendetta. But when the most respected black lawyer in America personally walked into the bureau and said this man needs to be investigated, that defense fell apart. Marshall handed the FBI the cover for everything that came next. What came next was Monroe, August 1961. Freedom riders had already been beaten in Birmingham and had their bus firebombed outside Anniston, Alabama. When they arrived in Monroe to test bus integration, Williams warned them that nonviolent tactics would get them killed in a town like this. Pickets marched daily at the courthouse. Crowds of hostile white residents grew larger every afternoon. During the unrest, a white couple from a neighboring town, Bruce and Mabel Stegall, accidentally drove into the black section of Monroe. Streets were closed. A crowd surrounded their car. Williams brought the couple into his home to protect them. They stayed for roughly 2 hours until they could leave safely. The Stegalls themselves later acknowledged that Williams had protected them, not kidnapped them. It did not matter. Monroe Police Chief A. Monty called Williams and told him that in 30 minutes he would be hanging in the courthouse square. That was not a figure of speech. Monty meant it. Williams had to decide in seconds whether to stay and face a lynch mob backed by local law enforcement or run. He ran. His wife Mabel and their 2 small children went with him. They fled first to Canada, then to Cuba, where Fidel Castro granted them political asylum. On August 28, 1961, the FBI issued a federal warrant in Charlotte, North Carolina, charging Williams with unlawful interstate flight to avoid prosecution for kidnapping. The FBI's wanted poster described him as a freelance writer and janitor. It said he had previously been diagnosed as schizophrenic. It called him armed and extremely dangerous. J. Edgar Hoover personally signed the fugitive warrant, a Marine veteran, an elected NAACP chapter president, a man who had just protected 2 white citizens from a mob. The federal government called him a mentally ill kidnapper and put him on the run. From Havana, Williams didn't go quiet. He launched Radio Free Dixie, broadcasting on a 50,000-watt transmitter at 6:90 a.m. on station CNBC. The signal reached from Washington State to Long Island. Every Friday night at 11, his wife Mabel introduced the show with jazz, blues, and what they called the new music of freedom. Then Williams delivered editorials about racial oppression that no American radio station would air. The broadcasts mixed Nina Simone's Mississippi Goddam and Herbie Hancock's Watermelon Man with news dispatches and commentary that treated black resistance as legitimate political action, not criminal behavior. One listener from Los Angeles wrote in 1962 that every time he played his copy, he let someone else make another recording. That way, more people will hear the true story of Monroe. Bootleg tapes circulated through Watts and Harlem. WBAI in New York and KPFA in Berkeley rebroadcast segments. The CIA tried to jam the signal. In 1962, Williams published Negroes with Guns. Historian Timothy B. Tyson later called it the intellectual foundation for the Black Power movement. The book became required reading for Huey Newton and Bobby Seale when they founded the Black Panther Party 4 years later. Cuba eventually turned on Williams as well. Cuban revolutionaries close to the Communist Party pushed back on his ideas, claiming they excluded white workers from the struggle. The government reduced his transmitter power from 50,000 watts to 1,000, claiming technical difficulties. Williams saw what was happening. In a letter to friends, he wrote that he hoped to depart soon. By 1965, he had moved to China, where Mao Zedong treated him as a visiting dignitary and met him personally before the National Day Parade. Even in exile, Williams kept building. He served as international chairman of the Revolutionary Action Movement, and in 1968, a coalition of Black nationalists elected him first president of the Republic of New Africa. He did not return to the United States until 1969. In December 1975, represented by attorney William Kunstler, Williams finally stood trial in Monroe, North Carolina. The state dropped all charges. No apology, no acknowledgement that the kidnapping had been fabricated, no recognition that a man had spent 8 years in exile for the crime of protecting 2 white people in his own home. The case simply disappeared. Williams died on October 15, 1996, in Baldwin, Michigan. Rosa Parks delivered his eulogy. She said the sacrifices he made and what he did should go down in history and never be forgotten. They were forgotten anyway, and the people who erased him knew exactly what they were doing. The mechanism that destroyed Robert F. Williams followed a pattern: fabricate or inflate a local charge, escalate it to federal jurisdiction through a technical warrant, use the fugitive status to discredit the target's political work. Fred Hampton, assassinated in his bed by Chicago police coordinating with the FBI's COINTELPRO program, 10 years after Williams fled Monroe. Marcus Garvey, convicted on mail fraud charges and deported in 1927 after building the largest Black organization in American history. The Deacons for Defense and Justice, armed Black veterans who protected civil rights workers across Louisiana and Mississippi in the mid-1960s, watched as the same federal agencies that ignored Klan violence scrutinized their every move. The charges change. The targets change. The mechanism does not. Find a local pretext. Add federal power. Erase a leader. Williams's case was different from Hampton's or Garvey's in one critical way. Hampton was destroyed by the FBI working with local police. Garvey was destroyed by the federal government working with rival Black leaders who resented his popularity. Williams was destroyed by a collaboration so specific that it left a paper trail with a date on it, June 4, 1959. The NAACP's own chief counsel walked into the FBI and pointed the federal government at a sitting NAACP chapter president. Marshall went on to become the first Black justice of the United States Supreme Court, confirmed in 1967 after being nominated by President Lyndon Johnson. His secret relationship with the FBI did not surface until 1996, when USA Today obtained his bureau file through the Freedom of Information Act. Marshall had been dead for 3 years. Williams had been dead for 1. Neither man could respond. The NAACP never restored Williams's membership. The state of North Carolina never apologized for the fabricated kidnapping charge. Marshall's role as an FBI informant against his own organization's leadership has never been formally acknowledged by the NAACP or the Marshall estate. Robert F. Williams built a model that proved armed community defense could work without a single casualty. He showed that a local chapter could force a city government to act when the national office wouldn't. That international pressure could free imprisoned children when legal channels failed. Every one of those successes made him a bigger target, and not just for the Klan or the FBI. The people inside his own movement decided that a working-class veteran from Monroe, North Carolina, was more dangerous than the system they were all supposed to be fighting. The rifle his grandmother gave him as a boy had belonged to his grandfather, a man born into slavery who understood that freedom without the means to defend it isn't freedom at all. Williams carried that lesson from Monroe to Havana to Beijing and back. The people who silenced him carried a different lesson. They learned that you can destroy a black leader without ever putting on a hood. All you need is a memo, a meeting, and a man on the inside willing to make the introduction.